In an article by Madame Menor written on August 28, 2019, educator Jasmine Denise states, schools across the country, primarily those in high poverty neighborhoods, are struggling to fund students with the essential resources they need to be successful as a result of unfair distributions of funding across the public education system. This proves that across the nation, low-income communities struggle to fund schools and the students are the ones suffering. Resolved, the United States federal government should focus on funding low-income schools in order for all students to receive a great education. In an article written on February 18, 2019 by Linda Darling Hammond, the president of the Learning Policy Institute at Stanford University, and Jeff Reichs, co-founder of the Reichs Foundation, state, inadequate school funding derails the future for students already struggling against the odds, intensifying disparities that harm society as a whole by reducing young people's capacity to contribute to society. Both authors also go on to state that when we provide adequate funding for resources such as well-prepared teachers and school leaders, smaller class sizes, and extended learning time, we see returns in the form of improved student outcomes. Today I will be discussing issues with underfunded schools, inherencies of the problem, and what we could do to solve this problem. Now that I have introduced my topic, I will talk further about the problem at hand. It is no joke that our nation has a funding gap when it comes to funding schools, which leaves low-income communities struggling to provide students with all the necessary tools to succeed in school and in life. Throughout the years, the government has attempted to solve this issue with underfunded schools to no success, and the problem only seems to have worsened. In an article by CNBS published on October 29, 2020, Abigail Hess states, according to the Economic Policy Institute, Black children are more than twice as likely as white children to attend high poverty schools, and researchers estimate that primarily white schools receive $23 billion more in annual funding than non-white school districts. The funding gap results in larger classes, less resources, and cuts in programs that are meant to help students. It is unfair that not all schools are given the same opportunities due to funding, which results in low-income students struggling to prosper in life. Due to low-income schools being underfunded, the quality in teaching becomes harder for many educators. In an article by the Washington Post, Valerie Struss, a reporter who wrote an article on the Metropolitan Expeditionary Learning School in Queens, wrote the experience of one of the English teachers, which states, every year as our class sizes grow, it gets harder to give students the meaningful feedback that they need throughout the writing process. Having a low budget not only affects the students, but it also makes it difficult for teachers to do their best when they're placed in tough situations. Although a rise in students per classroom is just one issue low funding schools causes, there are many other problems that can be caused. Other issues include, but are not limited to, cuts in after-school programs, low resources like textbooks and technology, and a lack of physical maintenance in school facilities. Now that I have talked about the problem at hand, next I will talk about the inherencies of it. The biggest issue with underfunded schools in low-income communities is an existential inherency because the federal government just does not seem to pass a reform for funding schools. The biggest issue with unequal funding in schools is that the funds are not distributed equally in states because some communities seem to make more than others. In an article written on February 25, 2019 by the Washington Post, the funding gap is largely the result of the reliance of property taxes as a primary source of funding for schools. Communities in overwhelmingly white areas tend to be wealthier, and school districts' ability to raise money depends on the value of local property and the ability of residents to pay higher taxes. It is unfair that although no one chooses where they are born, they are faced to suffer the consequences. For this problem, many rich communities have better schools because they're rich, while low-income communities struggle. It is an unfair way of funding schools that needs to be changed. Although the federal government provides schools with money, it is not enough to close the funding gap, and therefore low-income communities struggle to fund schools. Laura Meckler continues to state in the article by the Washington Post that the funding disparities that result have been challenged in many states, frequently in court. Many states have worked to make formulas more equitable with varying success. While we have made some progress on the issue of economic inequality in our schools, we still have a terrible and inequitable system. This just proves that although many states have attempted to fix the funding gap, it's not as easy as it seems. Many low-income communities still struggle to get funded correctly, and that is why students struggle to get a great education. Now that I have talked about the inherency of the problem, next I will talk about a possible solution. The problem with funding schools has been talked about for years, and yet no one focuses on creating change. However, with Joe Biden as our president-elect, we finally might get some change. One solution to this issue is supporting Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their plan to better the education system. According to JoeBiden.com, last accessed on November 20, 2020, it states Biden will work on closing this funding gap by nearly tripling Title I funding, which goes to schools serving a higher number of children from low-income families. This new funding will first be used to ensure teachers at Title I schools are paid competitively. 3- and 4-year-olds have access to preschool, and districts provide access to rigorous coursework across all their schools, not just a few. Tripling Triple I funding means that the government will provide $45 billion to schools across the nation, which will have a huge impact on many schools. As of now, so many people are supporting and trusting that Biden will make this change. And the best part is that he plans to focus on low-income communities. In conclusion, I propose a possible solution, and now I will conclude my speech. Resolved: the United States federal government should focus on funding low-income schools in order for all students to receive a great education. Today, I have discussed the problems with underfunded schools, inherencies, and possible solutions regarding the issue with underfunded schools in low-income communities. It is unfair that someone's zip code can determine whether their school is equipped to educate them correctly. It is also unfair that many students who must face the consequences are being born in low-income communities. This is why it is important that change needs to be made in order for everyone to receive a fair education and prosper in life.